Today I'm going to do something a little bit different and I hope you guys like it. Since this video is about why I've never been at all tempted to take steroids, I thought I'd put the nature back in natural bodybuilding and record over scenery from my hikes. You know, we see a lot of gym footage, basements, stuff like that, but we don't see people posing in nature like they did back in the day. And to be honest, I think a lot of the golden era and silver era guys really underutilized the scenery around them because California is absolutely stunning. What I'm using right here is known as June Gloom. Marine layer lighting is highly anabolic, but unfortunately it's also way more expensive than steroids these days. That was a California housing prices joke. But anyway, this is going to be part 1 of 2 since there are 2 semi-separate themes. And I think it'll make more sense to divide them up. Today's theme is natural bodybuilding is the only type of bodybuilding that's exciting anymore. This one's going to be a little more upbeat and optimistic because that's what we need, right? The reason to stay natural is always presented in such a negative way. Like, we're doing this because we don't want to die, we don't want side effects, we don't want to be unhealthy, we don't want to be a cheater, whatever that means, right? That's lame, you know? We're just doing something because of a bunch of things that we don't want. I mean, we're basically choosing the lesser of 2 evils. Who gets excited about that, right? Nobody, you know? No wonder a bunch of broccoli-headed Zoomers are sauced out of their minds by the time they turn 19. Natural lifting is usually presented as, your results won't be that great, but at least you won't have bad blood work. I mean, nobody gets fired up about that, sorry. So at least I'm going to see if I can do something about that. I'm not Tom Platz as an orator, but I do train deep knee angles and I'm willing to give it a go. So let's see what we can do here. The next video in this series is going to be a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more of a, doomer, that Narvent song with Ryan Reynolds looking unhappy in the rain or whatnot. He's really me or whatever, or he's, you know the thing I'm talking about. I wish I'd actually got some landscape footage during the rainy season because that would have been sick, but I didn't think about it then. It only rains in the winter in California. We don't get rain like most of the year. Anyway, it'll still be more positive than all this, don't take steroids so you don't die gloom and doom that we usually get. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I've never been at all tempted to take steroids. And I get that that's kind of a strong statement since a lot of natural creators have some kind of story about, I get the temptation you guys are facing because I was really tempted to take steroids at one point. One day I got so black-pilled that I finally broke down and bought some steroids, but as I was walking home with them, I slipped on a banana peel and the bag went flying out of my hands and landed on a conveniently placed conveyor belt where it was smashed by a comically large hammer. So I didn't get to try the steroids, and in that moment I realized that the strength that I was looking for was inside me all along, and I'm really glad that happened because I've been natty ever since, and I'm here to tell you guys to stay strong and don't give in to temptation, right? That's kind of the story, right? And I'm giving these guys a hard time, but stories like that do happen, maybe not with a conveyor belt and whatnot, but something to that effect did happen to natural hypertrophy, as we saw in my last video on the topic. And, I do think he's being genuine about that. I don't think he's just, making something up to seem relatable. So, it is, something that a lot of people deal with, just not me. So that's what I'm trying to explain in this video. Now, after I gave these guys kind of a hard time for the, Wile E. Coyote, conveyor belt story, what I'm going to say next may seem a little bit hypocritical as an opener to my video on why I've never been tempted to take steroids, but just bear with me, it'll make sense. If I'd come up in the golden era, if I'd been a young bodybuilder in the golden era, I probably would have taken steroids. I think if I'd been a young bodybuilder in the 60s and 70s, I'd have done it, Just imagine seeing all these guys getting more jacked than you could ever have possibly imagined, and at that time, they, looked really good too, not just jacked, but, aesthetic, appealing. Wouldn't you want to join that party? I know I would. It isn't just about this lame, oh, I'm unhappy with the way I look, I have body dysmorphia stuff that we've become, so used to today. I don't know whether men were particularly unhappy about their physiques back in the day, or maybe if they were, they just did the right thing and just kept it to themselves. I don't know. But anyway, it's not about that. It's about the excitement of having a whole new frontier to explore. Not something negative like, oh, I don't like the way I look, so I want to change it. But like, oh, wow, look at this cool new thing we get to do, So there's this whole new frontier that you could explore in the golden era. And it would, you look good, you're doing new things. It's awesome, right? I mean, wouldn't you want to do curls with Arnold or train legs with Tom Platz? That would be sick. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? I know I would. While I was at it, I'd tell Vince Gironda that he was a skinny twerp to his face, and then I'd go build the biggest pair of traps anybody had ever seen in the history of bodybuilding. A back so detailed that early European Christians would spontaneously show up at Muscle Beach and try to persecute anyone caught near me. So, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the actual history of the Christmas tree, but anyway, it was a Christmas tree back joke. I need to probably try to keep the comedy out of this stuff and just stay serious. But anyway, that would be awesome. Like I would probably have gone on gear, in the golden era. Just being real. And obviously that's not really me making a good case for not being tempted by steroids. But here's the thing, that was not my era. By the time I started lifting in the late 2000s, the landscape was completely different, Physiques at the top level of bodybuilding were no longer appealing, they were excessive. With all due respect to the athletes, very few people want to look like that. I certainly don't. I certainly don't right now, and definitely as a kid growing up, I didn't want to look like that. And what's worse about these physiques is, they're not really pushing boundaries anymore. And they, they weren't at the time that I was coming up either. Mass monsters had already been around for at least a decade at that point. So it wasn't a new thing, Maybe some guys were managing to get slightly higher FFMIs than the next guy. But at that point, how can you even tell? Like, you stand two of them next to each other. If one's a little bit bigger, can you even tell? It's hard to even perceive, right? Who cares? It isn't only unappealing, but it's also kind of boring, to be honest. So why would I want to get involved in that? I think it's no accident that time when I was getting into lifting was exactly the time that the first wave of fake natties appeared. These guys get a lot of shit for selling supplements or whatever they're selling based off of a lie. And obviously I understand that, but I don't think it was all about the money, because there's no reason people couldn't have tried that grift before. But it never took off in earlier eras back when the absolute champions actually looked good, like, desirable, like people would want to look, like Lee Haney, Arnold, guys like that. I don't think anyone cared about natural bodybuilding, and I don't think anyone was trying to be a fake daddy. It just, I think a big part of why people started doing the fake natty thing was wanting to find a way to be bodybuilders without having to look like some kind of bizarre science experiment, So why lie then? Why not just be open like they do today? Well, because the money, of course, obviously that's a factor, but because it wasn't talked about, obviously that was a factor, and no one at that time had realized that being open about being on gear itself could be a really good grift and money-making opportunity. Greg Doucette, who, by the way, was a fake natty before he became honest. But anyway, even more importantly, I think it would be boring, It'd be boring to be open about being on gear at that time while not trying to be a mass monster. Where's the excitement in following a well-traveled path and stopping halfway because you don't want to get too big? It's boring, right? A Gymshark guy with a nice bone structure taking a tasteful amount of gear to get a tasteful amount of muscle through, tasteful men's fitness workouts has about as much of the spirit that used to make bodybuilding exciting as a woman putting on makeup, These are mundane activities to make a physical object look a certain way. And I think the fake natty era was arguably an early iteration of what we now call classic physique. And unfortunately, while, much more admirable from a moral perspective, modern classic physique is just as boring, mundane. The form of bodybuilding, recapturing, the visuals that we liked, but it has none of the spirit, No, building muscle using steroids is just not interesting anymore. It's mundane. You get really jacked using drugs. It's like, of course you did. That's to be expected. Some people are going to bristle at that and say, oh, you still have to put in the work, or talk about some people not responding well or whatever. But we all know that most guys can get pretty huge with enough gear. And yes, work, but it doesn't necessarily have to be particularly good work in a lot of cases. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking, So I realized that this is supposed to be a video about why I've never been tempted to take steroids, and I barely talked about myself, which is probably not what I'm supposed to be doing on this platform. I'm supposed to be showing you a day in my life, talking about my feelings or what I eat to be relatable, but I'm getting there, okay? For me, it's kind of like, babe, why don't you ever talk about your feelings? And, the response is, well, what did you think that 45-minute monologue about the consequences of the Industrial Revolution was, right? Just me? Yeah, probably. All right, I'm going to stop with the attempts at comedy. Anyway, at the risk of humble bragging, I've always been that stereotypical kid who underperformed because he wasn't challenged enough, right? I already get called an elitist by my small but growing contingent of haters. I take that as a compliment. That I have at least some haters. It's nice. They show a fair amount of dedication. So anyway, it's not exactly a secret that I'm elitist, so I'm not going to try to hide it too much, In high school, I fell asleep through almost every chemistry class until we got to balancing equations, and everyone else struggled enough to make it worth my time. My teacher was kind of shocked that I was actually participating in class for a change, but because it was because there was something that, other people, weren't doing well, so it actually seemed like maybe it was a challenge and maybe it'd be fun to actually be good at something. Anyway, I'm not saying that's a good attitude. It's been fairly unhelpful in a lot of cases in my life, but it is what it is. Anyway, for better or worse, I've always been disinterested in things that didn't seem challenging, especially when it's something that is kind of supposed to feel difficult, like a Tough Mudder or something that's designed to make people feel like they accomplished something, but it's basically a foregone conclusion that if you actually try, you'll be successful. And I realize I'm coming off like a complete asshole here, but that's not the point. The point of this is not for you to like me. The point of it is that I saw enhanced bodybuilding as something like a Tough Mudder, where if you just show up and try, you'll get a participation trophy. And I'm not talking about getting an actual bodybuilding trophy. Obviously, there are a bunch of factors that go into that. Although, this is kind of a theme in my life. I don't really care about the, competition trophies anyway. But I'm just talking about getting jacked. And yeah, I mean, I saw and to a certain extent kind of still see, building steroid muscle as a participation trophy, something that anybody can get if they just show up and try, and therefore not interesting. And yeah, maybe some people don't respond, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I changed my mind on that. I do kind of think that, if you just show up and try and you take gear, that's kind of a foregone conclusion. It's kind of a participation trophy, right? But anyway, in natural bodybuilding, on the other hand, success is definitely not guaranteed. In fact, a whole lot of people were saying that success past a certain point was impossible. Remember, this was kind of back in the day. The conversation about natural limits wasn't at the level where it is now in some sectors. It's still very bad in some sectors, but back then it was abysmal, right? Basically the only people talking about it were communities of insular losers of the sort who populate like nattyornot.com. So standards were ridiculously low overall. You'd hear myths like, big traps or delts are a sign of steroid use, etc. Or, you can't build big traps and delts without steroids, right? You used to hear that all the time. So when I reached the point where my gains started to slow down and I started, to hear more discussion of natural limits, rather than deter me, it made staying natural interesting. Like, what am I going to go with? A surefire participation trophy? Or am I going to go with the thing that everybody else is saying really hard that most people won't be successful at? I mean, to me, that's an easy choice. And like I said in the previous video that I did in response to natural hypertrophy, it really helped that I had halfway decent lifts. Better than what a lot of these black pill losers had claimed were reasonable expectations for a natural. Better than a lot of the big juicers at the gyms that I trained at. Oh, I'm sorry, is that a bad attitude? Am I only supposed to be comparing myself to myself? My bad. I'll go meditate on gratitude, drink seaweed powder, mass text a bunch of intellectual thoughts, and, whatever other, hippie bullshit I'm supposed to be doing to get my dopamine receptors regulated or whatever, right? No, outlifting juicers naturally is motivating. Sorry, sue me, it's the truth. Especially when they get really mad about it and come over at you all red. Hey, I got a kick out of that, And it definitely helped that by using unconventional methods, I actually did manage to get big traps naturally in defiance of the, conventional nattyornot.com wisdom on the internet at that time. That was enough to give me a taste of pushing boundaries, and even though I did end up stagnating and made virtually no progress for almost a decade, that tiny little taste of the real thing, like the real accomplishment of something that is actually challenging, was enough that participating in steroid use to get a guaranteed, participation trophy muscle held no appeal for me, especially given that I knew, based on the silver era guys, that more was possible, even though I didn't know how to unlock it at the time. And, that was enough for me then. But now, fast forward and I actually, take the time to learn all that stuff that the silver era guys knew, start making way more gains, than any of these videos on, oh, this is how much muscle you'll gain each year as a natural lifter. More than those videos would have led you to believe in my mid 30s at a time when I'm getting a bunch of TRT ads directed at my age group. But so yeah, I'm making way better gains than I'm supposed to as a natural, again, in defiance of all these, videos, enough to even get notoriety, naturally as a fitness influencer in, a very, oversaturated fitness industry. It's great, I'm actually getting the thing that I wanted, which is, doing something that's difficult, that does present a challenge, and that was fantastic, And better yet, I'm seeing other lifters who I genuinely believe are natural, noble natties, pushing boundaries in other ways, showing me possibilities that I hadn't even considered for myself if I follow in their footsteps. Like actually having big arms. That was I mean, I'll be honest. At one point, I thought that it wasn't possible for naturals to get arms past a certain point because I couldn't. Right? I was a little bit black pill too. Right? But listen, there are way too many natural guys out there today getting really big arms. You know, GVS, Hersoviak, Bald Viking, Alex Leonidas, natural hypertrophy. You know, you've got even up and comers like basement bodybuilding. I'm not saying he's not impressive too. Just, you know, he seems like he's a little bit newer to the scene, but his arms are getting massive. You know, I mean, I think he's at 18 on one arm. So I mean, you know, with all these guys, you know, building big arms and obviously other areas too, that's got to be possible for me. You know, so it's a very optimistic time to be in bodybuilding. Just like things that people did not think were possible, or a lot of people didn't think were possible 10 years ago, are seeming, you know, increasingly possible. I'm even becoming optimistic about calf development. My calves are starting to, you know, look a whole lot better, and I've only been training them effectively for like a year and a half. Let's, you know, in terms of bodybuilding, I just feel like we're making a lot of progress in a very positive direction. I don't think we've seen the end of the line. I think there's a lot left to unlock. And you know what? Here we've been talking kind of about hypertrophy. I've been talking about all these other guys who are getting really impressive results in terms of, you know, size and aesthetics. And what I want to add to that conversation, another thing that I think makes natural bodybuilding so very appealing and positive, and that I think would make far fewer people choose to take steroids if they knew it was actually possible, is also what a well-developed natural physique can do. You know, today's fitness industry is really jaded about steroids. It's really hard to get excited about 280-pound mass monsters, especially given that it's becoming, you know, increasingly common knowledge that the mass monster physiques are more or less useless for any sort of athletic endeavor, even strength in a lot of cases. Not saying they aren't strong, but, you know, typically if they exert it too much, they'll just, you know, tear a muscle. And here's the thing though, it's fully within the capabilities of a regular natural lifter, not, well, regular meaning like tons and tons of training obviously, but just a regular guy who trains well, to generate genuine excitement in this jaded industry. You know, because it's cool they're doing it naturally, sure, but also because, you know, even in this oversaturated look at me industry, there are a ton of avenues for development that are just slept on. So whether that's somebody like, you know, GVS generating a bunch of excitement with just how freaking big he's getting naturally, how, you know, people like Hersoviak just having aesthetics that rival anyone on gear, just or better, really. Just he looks better than like 99.9% of people on gear. You know, it's exciting, it's cool. Or people like me just getting a lot of notoriety for, you know, what I can physically do. I'm out there doing things that, you know, even in an era where performance enhancing drugs are just so rampant, you know, people are looking at some of the things that I do and saying, wow, that I haven't seen that before. I didn't know people could do that, you know. And that's because a lot of avenues for development that are fully available to naturals are slept on, you know, probably in a lot of cases because it's easier just to take gear and get huge, right? So I'm very optimistic for a time when genuine natural lifters can get increasing attention both for their aesthetics and, you know, desirable physiques despite being, you know, large and impressive, as well as for physical capabilities. And, you know, unlike with enhanced bodybuilding, you know, the capabilities and physique go hand in hand in naturals. There's no need or benefit in sacrificing one for the other, right? So anyway, it's an awesome, exciting time to be in natural bodybuilding, I think. I would have, as I said earlier, I would have considered it worth staying natural for just a little taste of results beyond what is expected. Something where people probably can't do that. You probably can't build big traps naturally. Oh, well, I did. You know, I would have considered it worth it just for that. And that's a tiny little crumb of something real. You know, a real overcoming of a challenge, a real trophy that is not a participation trophy. You show up, you get it. I would have considered it worth staying natural just for that. But man, what I got instead, I mean, I think natural bodybuilding today, it's the most exciting period in bodybuilding history since the golden era. You know, common perceptions of what is possible are really being challenged. And that's simply not possible with enhanced bodybuilding at this point in history. And I mean, even if you could, you know, push boundaries, would you want to? I mean, what would you end up looking like? Very few people would want that, I think. Now, obviously, enhanced strength athletes are still pushing boundaries routinely with no sign of stopping. So a lot of this doesn't apply to them. And that, along with the fact that, you know, smart and brutally hard training is absolutely required for athletic success explains why a lot of enhanced strength athletes tend to get way more respect than the enhanced bodybuilders, you know? A lot of naturals look at enhanced bodybuilders and think to themselves, I could be that big if I was taking what he's taking, and I mean, personally, I don't mind saying it out loud. Probably bigger in a lot of cases, sue me, you know? Get as mad at me as you like in the comments. I've been to some of the biggest bodybuilding gyms in the country. I know what their training looks like. So I'll say it out loud. I don't care. But let me tell you this, I sure as hell don't look at a CrossFit Games athlete and say, oh yeah, I could perform like that if I was taking what he's taking. You know, hell no, I ain't about that life, you know. I know I'm not going to go there. Or even, you know, even some recreationally enhanced dude deadlifting 900 pounds or something. That's a lot of weight. I don't look at that and say, oh yeah, if I took those drugs, I could do it. No, I'm gonna stay quiet, you know what I mean? On that. So, if you're taking from this video, bottom line, if you're taking from this video that I look down on enhanced lifters, you've completely 100% misunderstood it. That's not what I'm saying in the slightest. I respect enhanced strength athletes, and I also respect enhanced bodybuilders. You know, I do admire the discipline that it takes to compete at the top levels of modern bodybuilding, although I have to say I do question the judgment a bit. But, you know, I'm not trying to disrespect enhanced lifters. I don't see any reason why we can't have mutual respect. We can see both pursuits as just different paths that are both cool in their own way. If you guys like science fiction, you know, you probably like science fiction stories that involve, you know, protagonists who are these, you know, enhanced like space marines that have all sorts of like science fiction technology, making them into like superhuman super soldiers. Those are cool. But then there's also cool stories about just regular dudes thrown into a crazy science fiction setting with like aliens and whatnot. And you can read both and enjoy both. You don't have to pick. Like those are both cool. You know, you have to pick with your own life, but that doesn't mean you can't enjoy seeing, you know, characters out of the other genre too, right? So I don't want this to be all hostile, but at the same time, like we have to be able to talk about natural bodybuilding, you know, in a realistic way without worrying too much about the feelings of the other side. You know, we're never going to get anything done if we have to sugarcoat everything, right? So, I mean, could I have found more tactful ways of phrasing some of this? Sure, but you know, there's so much gloom and doom and boredom, you know, surrounding the way natural bodybuilding gets talked about that, you know, a little bit of aggression, even confrontation, in the interest of just presenting a more interesting, compelling reason to take the natural path, I think is warranted, right? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this format. I had a ton of fun getting the footage. I think it's a nice change of pace, and I hope you guys agree. So let me know if you guys like the style of video, and make sure to let the algorithm know via all the myriad ways the algorithm gets informed of those things, the little bell thing, all the subscriptions and various things. I wish it was just one button you could click, but unfortunately it's more than that. If you're mad at me for everything that I said in the video, please let me know in the comments. As many of them as possible. Thank you very much. But yeah, let me know if you guys like the style of video, because, you know, I'm out at scenic locations all the time. And basically just as childcare, you know, here's a little tip for all my toddler parents out there. The toddlers are not ever going to let you have an easy day at home. No matter how tired you are, they're not just going to let you chill. So as long as you're going to be putting in work anyway, you might as well just chug a Monster Zero and take them somewhere in nature, nice, to make some memories. You're going to have to work either way, and honestly, they usually behave better in nature. Nothing they tear up belongs to you, and obviously the memories and pictures are priceless. I really wish I could share that with you guys, because, you know, having little ones is awesome, and man, their adventures out in, you know, scenic locations are cute. You know, it's really great. But unfortunately, this being the climate it is, I have to protect them first and foremost, so I don't post them on social media. But anyway, yeah, I'll be working on a follow-up video explaining why staying natural appeals to me from a different angle. And I can also do the same landscape video format if you guys like this one. That's pretty much all. I haven't plugged the book, but you guys know it's in the link in the description if you guys decide to take the plunge and buy it. I don't think you're going to regret it. No one has yet told me that they do, so there's the plug for that. And anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I enjoyed making it. See you guys next time.